right, it is 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. I see some folks have had a location change, so we get like stretch legs, get some lunch, do some other things done, and then are in a comfy spot now to pick up with our work on science. So let's go ahead and get started. Flashing these norms one more time as a reminder, just to check that you are on mute since Stephen is recording for us, and to again collect the materials that you want to use to take notes. We'll be focusing a lot more on video during this next section, so definitely notebook paper. It's helpful to write down pieces of evidence that you're seeing as you're watching video as we continue to solidify our understanding of strong vision for excellent instruction in science. And again, chat for anything that you need or any questions that you have that come up as we're going today. Okay, so before the break, we started off by talking about the importance of a shared vision, and some folks had some great next steps that they were thinking about in terms of convening teachers and their ability to write a vision. And we talked about, began to talk about how you can use the tools to take action on that vision or to assess that vision. You know, if you are taking a look at grade appropriate, looking at assignments to see if they're grade appropriate or not, that's a good way to help you and teachers that you're building understand if the work that they're putting in front of kids is moving them towards your vision for excellent instruction. And so with the second half of our time today on science, we are gonna take a look at some videos, which I'm really excited to share with you. And then we'll close out with like a case study where we look at a pair of artifacts. So a assignment and a video that actually go together, and think about how we might use both sets of both pieces of evidence to think about how we would develop the teacher if we thought this was a teacher that we were working with in our schools. I think Krista already dropped the link for the materials in the chat for you there. So if you closed it out while you were away, go ahead and open those back up. Same folder. We are using the STEM teaching toolkit again. We will use the STEM action planner again, and then the materials that we need for strong instruction are in that folder as well. So I'm going to click ahead because if you need the link, it's in the chat, but I think most folks probably still have it from last time. All right, we're going to jump in quickly then to talk about the science instructional walkthrough tool as an opportunity to build our own internal understanding of excellent instruction and then to support teachers in building their understanding of strong instruction. You have a copy of this tool in your toolkit, so go ahead and open that one up. It is called the Instructional Walkthrough Tool. And we did look at this tool. We looked at most sections of this tool pretty quickly in June. So we're going to be able to hop into some video pretty much right away, but I want to give you a minute to access that tool and then to review the tool. So take the next 55 seconds to open that tool back up and refamiliarize yourself with the way that that tool is organized. Okay, so that tool, you'll see it has 4 sections. So we're really going to focus our time on the second, third, and fourth section on content, practices, and student ownership. The first section you'll see is on culture of learning. And all of the videos that we're going to watch today have a solid culture of learning. We talked in June about how this is an important thing to be noticing and evaluating when observing instruction to make sure that students are set up to be successful in the content, the practices, and the student ownership. But we're not going to spend time developing our understanding of that vision today because that vision is more content agnostic, and I want to make sure that you've got a strong understanding of the content-specific vision as it relates to content, practices, and student ownership, specifically in science classrooms. And we looked at middle school student work examples in our time this morning. We're going to switch to some high school classroom videos for the second half. I think it's like helpful to, when we're looking at the content, use lower grade content to help us assess our understanding. But I think for instruction, it's a little bit, it's nice for us to engage with high school level of content, and also to, I think we're just better set up to transition to high school examples now that we've already looked at some middle school examples today. Similar to what we did earlier, we will do the guided practice example where we'll walk together through the tool. And then at the end, you'll have an opportunity to do one all the way on your own. We're gonna have more breakout groups this time. So more often we'll ask you to view and then rate and then chat about it with your peers before we come back and norm on our assessments. So we're gonna use this high school chemistry class to start. And we will start by looking at content, as we always do. There are two indicators which are very similar to the content indicators from the grade appropriate assignments tools. And we always start with content to see if what students are doing reflects the key instructional shifts that are articulated by the standards. We start here because we know that if students aren't working towards rigorous grade level standards, the rest of what's happening doesn't really matter. The standards build intentionally within the grade level and across the grade level to prepare students for college and career. And so then we have to make sure that we're considering this first when we think about what excellent science instruction looks like. Two things that we're thinking about, two bullet points, but I think it's almost sort of like four things in total that we're thinking about when we evaluate content in a science observation. The first is the use of a phenomenon. I think we've seen a lot of examples of assignments being grounded in a real world example. And then we're looking for evidence of the three dimensions. So that's why I said it's kind of like four things. What we're looking for is the integration of the disciplinary core ideas, the science and engineering practices, and the cross-cutting concepts. And I think that's where we can sort of get into like whereas like with the assignments, we're looking at like a 0, 1, 2. We can get into a situation where something might be a mostly and not a yes, because maybe it's got a good phenomenon and it's got some of the dimensions, but it's not all of the dimensions. And so it's nice to have a little bit more options here for when we're thinking about how we would evaluate the content of the science lesson. So we will be talking about which grade level standard it aligns to, and do we see the right content and the core ideas, evidence of practices, and evidence of the cross-cutting concepts. But we'll start there and we'll take a look at a video. So we are going to watch, oh, I don't want her to start yet. We're going to watch about 2 minutes of this classroom video. I will tell you it is day 2 of a new unit. So in the previous day, they have watched a video clip and done some modeling. We're going to see them picking up the next day in discussing the models and then getting ready to move into some other activities. We're going to watch 2 minutes now, and then we're going to watch some more 3 or 4 minutes of another section later. But know that typically when you're using this walkthrough tool, you would not observe a classroom for 2 minutes and then be able to check every single indicator, right? But we're just talking about content. So we're going to watch a small section and then talk about the content. So if you've got a place to write notes, go ahead and get your pen, your paper, or your blank Word document ready before I hit play. We're going to watch 2 minutes, and then we're going to discuss what evidence did we see of the phenomenon or design challenge and the 3 dimensions of the standard. And I really think that I clicked share sound before I shared my screen, but if you could just give me a thumb up when it starts, so I know that you can hear it, then I'll know that we're going to get this. Okay, and we are saying, and make sure I started at the exact right place. 3-minute mark.
This one and this one. took that a little bit further and they talked about how temperature affected the gas. And can you see what they're showing here? What happens to the gas when it got cooler? What do we see forming here? Yeah, so it's actually having a phase change. We're getting liquid water collecting at the bottom of the tanker. Look, they're showing us here. Are there any more gas, water?
Sorry, I don't know sure what you said.
Particles in this tanker, in this picture. They said it's all turned to liquid. So they have this idea that it started all as a gas, and then it started to condense and become liquid, and then eventually we got all liquid. And this group kind of started to think about that too. They started to think about this, this orange is showing that it was a gas, and then they didn't draw it yet, but they talked about this being water at the bottom of the tanker. And then some groups started to think about pressure and the molecules moving around. So this group shows the molecules moving. Here they're showing arrows, and they show these arrows going out, showing that there's collisions going against the edge here of the tanker. So they're thinking about that pressure that's being created by the molecules moving around here. And then they said as it gets colder, the molecules start to slow down. So again, they're talking about speed of the molecules. And then they talk about pressure here too. And they're also trying to think about these air molecules outside the tanker. So they have little drawings of air molecules here, and they're showing arrows of that air pushing against the tanker. And they're thinking that that air is just pushing down on the top. So that's something that we can think about. And then this group also talked about pressure. This is the one where they said they kind of imagined that this air around the tanker is like a giant foot pushing down on it, on the tank. And can this group remind us why was the air foot able to crush this one and not this one?
Because the first one with gas in it, the gas was creating pressure up against the walls of the tank, and if it was turned into water, the tank probably wasn't having as much pressure put upon the sides of it.
Okay.
So it probably was easier for it to crush.
Okay, so something about a difference between what was inside here versus here, which allowed that pressure outside to have different effects between this one and this one. And I think that this group also showed us that. They said the pressure inside became less than the pressure outside, and so it allowed it to crush. So we have all these ideas that we're working on, and so we have some idea of.
We'll pause there. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about what you've just seen, to look at those indicators and content, and to think about how you would rate on content on that not yet to yes scale. Just for content, I'll give you like a little bit of a head start, which is, I think I just showed you. So if you're going to need the Tennessee Standards Guide again, I would hop right to chemistry, which starts on page 198, and start there as you're looking for the correct standard that goes, or the most aligned standard that you think goes with the portion of the lesson that you saw. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look back over your notes, look at the standards, and then rate on content. And then at 1:45, we will come back together. Okay, and when you're ready, if you'll just type in the chat, if you would give this, based on that quick video, quick analysis, you would give this a not yet, a somewhat, a mostly, or a yes. Take your best guess based on what you've looked at so far. Get 3 answers so far. I'm gonna wait for about 2 more and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so we have got the full range, I think, of not yes all the way to yeses, which is great for us to have a chat about this. Let me move us on to
Temperature.
Oh, that's enough. Okay. So the first indicator or the first bullet point in this rating on phenomenon is on phenomenon in content, right? And so we didn't see the phenomenon being used, but we heard reference to it and we saw the question on the board of what caused the tanker to implode. We could also see in their models that they were drawing models of what caused the tanker to implode. So that indicator, we definitely saw evidence of. And if you haven't seen this video before, like 10 seconds, so I'm going to play it just for fun. This is, they watched this the previous day and then they made those models, predictions, what they thought was going to happen. So you can check this one out.
760. Gewonnen hat Herr
Click
Dr.
one more. I really like how the music gets cheesy there at the end. So I feel like I have to show the whole 18 seconds of it. So that was the phenomenon that this was based on. And that's okay that we didn't see them actually show the video again. We could hear that the content was being referenced in that real life example. I would love to hear what folks thought about the second part related to the 3 dimensions. And I'm guessing that some of our range of answers is because folks had different opinions about whether or not they saw evidence of the 3 dimensions. So I'm just going to ask Jack, do you mind coming off mute and telling us what you thought about the 3 dimensions?
I just thought the 3 dimensions provided an opportunity to see it visually better than you would just on a piece of paper. I like that better.
Got it. So you're thinking like about the model was there, but it wasn't as valuable as seeing the visual or the actual representation of it happening in person.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And Beth, do you mind sharing too?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Just in reference to the models that they were using, that was the question, correct?
Yeah, or what you thought about the disciplinary core ideas, practices, or concepts.
Yeah, so some of my notes that I wrote down was just looking at how she was kind of using their pre-work the day before to kind of guide her lesson for the day. And then that references back to like what we were talking about earlier this morning, just about like using student creativity to try to say, maybe what questions might you have? Those questions, would have come up while making those models. And then just in general, just making that inference of, their own discoveries with their different models before maybe, just we don't know what's coming next, but just in those 2 minutes, I'm assuming that now she will then take the lead to kind of explain how this happened. So using their inference and curiosity with their models to guide the lesson.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I think when we we think about what we saw her talking a lot, which I think probably would when I would watch that, would make me think like that there's a lot of things that I would want her to think about in terms of student voice and the instructional practices that she's using to engage students during just this chunk of the video. We want to be thinking also about the evidence in terms of, relation to the standards and the 3 parts of the standards. So this assignment does align with the high school chemistry standard. It aligns with this PS15, and you can see the first sentence is conduct investigations to explore and characterize the behavior of gases. They're talking about the behavior of gases here when they are thinking about temperature, pressure, and volume. So it does align to the correct disciplinary core idea. And then we want to ask ourselves about the presence of the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. So as it says in the header here, we did see use of developing and using models. So they had the students models that were drawn before and referencing them and asking kids to expand on those. So I would give that a yes. This is circled. It says systems and system models. And if you watch the full video, there is a pretty good discussion on systems and system models, but we did not see that in the chunk that we wrote. And so for that reason, this 2.5-minute chunk would get rated a mostly because we did see evidence of the phenomenon. We saw the right content and standards. We saw some science and engineering practices, but we did not see evidence of the cross-cutting concepts. So content-wise, this lesson is on track. Though I think if we think about just this part and the practices and the student ownership, we saw less evidence of that in this 2-minute video. Again, remember the purpose of today is to continue to build our understanding and not to get too wrapped up on what's the difference between a 3 and 4, really just thinking about, is this mostly aligned to the standards or in our vision, or is it not meeting our expectation for what content should look like? So that's the reason why this is rated as a mostly. The next 2 sections of this tool for our vision we'll do together. The first part is on the instructional practices. And so when we're looking to see how they're using these instructional practices, high leverage instructional practices here to support the learning of the content. So this is where we're looking to see how the teacher uses the models that are there to make the content come alive. How does the teacher engage students with their prior experience and their prior knowledge? How does the teacher check for understanding and adjust based on that understanding? And then what kind of facilitation of the learning is the teacher doing? So, and I think if we were to talk about this with the video that we just watched, in this chunk, we did not see strong evidence of it. And then the last section of the instructional walkthrough 2 asks us to consider if students are responsible for doing the scientific thinking in this classroom. We look to see if students are expressing their ideas, that they talk about and ask questions of each other's thinking, that they're sharing their thinking as it develops and using appropriate scientific language to express those ideas. Again, in the video we saw not a strong example of this. We saw her doing a lot of the talking and referencing previous student thinking, but in this actual lesson, this actual part that we watched, kids weren't doing a lot of the thinking. So I do want to show you another part of this lesson so that you can think about over the course of what does a whole block look like, how might this progress after kids have reviewed these models that they've done the previous day. So we're going to watch again about another 3 to 4 minute chunk of this video, and would like for you to take notes on the second 2 parts of the instructional walkthrough tool, the instructional practices and the student ownership. And then we will talk a little bit about what you noticed and how you would rate for those 2 parts of the video. So as you get your notes together, I'm going to get to the right section of the video. They have, at this point, talked about the different variables that they think are causing the tanker to crush. She's written down temperature, pressure outside, pressure inside, and she's setting them up to do an investigation. So let's start right 10-minute mark.
It's gonna do like the tanker did. Yes. Oh yeah, it will. Thank you.
The temperature was first.
Okay, so what do you think is going to happen?
It's gonna grow.
Okay, so I hear some people saying it's going to crush or implode. Why would it do that?
Are we covering it?
Let me give you one piece of context. I skipped, which is the direction. She set up the directions to show them how they were going to go work in groups, and they were going to use a soda can. They're going to heat up the water in the soda can and then manipulate the can in cold water. And she's asking them what they think is going to happen.
Okay, so you can't tell? You don't know what's going to happen? Okay, you know it's going to crush. You've seen it before, but you don't know why. You think we're changing the temperature. We're boiling it and then we're putting it in cold water.
I think it might like to slowly just like push it in, not like push it.
Maybe. Tani asked a good question. She said, are we going to seal the top of the container? So when we take this can and we flip it over, what are we doing to the top of the container here? You're going to be covering it. So you're going to keep thinking about that. And I'm not going to show you what's going to happen. I want you to do it yourself, okay? So
Watch out. Is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, no it isn't. Put soda can on hot plate and then turn the hot plate on.
It's going to cause a reaction.
what kind of reaction?
Cold and hot reaction, which causing it to implode, I guess.
Okay.
Well, it has
So
no air, so
what has no air?
maybe put it in here.
What do you mean it has no air?
It won't be getting any air.
Okay, so air can't get in.
Yeah.
So how does that affect it, do you think?
Well, just like our theory, air's trying to get in there.
Okay, so, all right, so you have your can and it's flipped over, and what do you mean by air's trying to get in?
Well, since it's cold, the water, the temperature of the water should cause it to be cold, and I don't know, actually.
Okay. So I want you to keep thinking about that. Think about that air, and you're describing it as it wants to get in, but I want you to keep thinking about, like, what is that air doing on the outside of the can?
Okay.
So you can start doing number one. You need to start by drying the pop can you can start by drying it at stage one, the dry pop can with 15 milliliters of water in it.
Does anyone else want to do the water thing?
You want to put in the water?
I do.
Good.
We're about ready to.
Yeah, there you go.
Flip it over and then stick it in there.
Oh.
That's cool.
Oh, that's good.
That is awesome.
Okay, we'll pause there. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look back over your notes and to look over the instructional practices and the student ownership section of the walkthrough tool and decide how you would rate those on a scale from not yet to yes. And then after that, we'll come back together and I'll give you our next steps. So you got till 2:01. I'd love to give you a chance to talk about your assessment of this video with some of the folks that are here today. So in a minute, Stephen's going to send you to breakout rooms for 3 minutes. In those 3 minutes, just want to try to come to consensus on how you would rate the instructional practices on the scale of not yet to yes, and the student ownership on that scale as well. And Stephen's going to send you there automatically, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. Okay, welcome back. I hope you have time to just norm on those 2 sections of the walkthrough tool. We are gonna, in our next practice, we're gonna think about feedback and application of the tool. So we had a shorter amount of time in there, and I just wanna quickly give you the ratings for these, which are both yes for this video. We did see the teacher making the concepts of the lesson explicit through explanations and representations and models. We saw the models in the beginning, but we also saw students doing some modeling of what was happening in each phase of the little investigation that they were doing. We heard her check her understanding in groups by questioning the student and his understanding of what was happening, and then leaving some space, which has to assume, have some grace and assumption that this is gonna lead to a longer summary in the end, but we saw her really intentionally guide students sort of puzzling question and then leave that puzzling question open for students to consider as they continue to go through the investigation. We also saw students doing a lot of the work of the thinking of the classroom. They were sharing their developing thinking with each other. They were asking questions, and they were using their scientific language in the models that they were drawing. So this is a lesson where we see the teacher thinking really intentionally about the practices they're using to engage students in the content, and to make sure that the students are the ones that are charged with doing the thinking. So like last time, we started with a pretty strong example of the instructional walkthrough tool and the vision for excellent science instruction in practice to ground ourselves and having a high bar for what we hope to see when we work with our teachers. We're then going to move into some practice where we can focus more on thinking about how we would develop the teachers that are in our building and what feedback we would give them. So if we're thinking about using this instructional walkthrough tool as a tool to grow teachers in your building, you may walk through your building, your science department, and collect some data on, oh no, am I frozen? Oh, okay, sorry, I can't tell if you all were just very still and I thought I was frozen. You may use this tool to assess science instruction in your building. And then depending on how you rate the teacher, you rate the lesson, not the teacher. It can help you to prioritize the feedback you want to give them and the kind of additional development that they would need to receive. So we are going to go back to middle school for a few minutes to practice with this classroom example. And we're going to practice rating the observation using all 3 parts of the rubric. We're going to use the 3 parts of the rubric that we've talked about. We're not going to talk about culture of learning. As I said, this is a strong culture of learning example. But we will talk about the content, the instructional practices, and the student ownership in this classroom. So I will give you a heads up and say that this is 7th grade. It is life science. So if you are looking at the Tennessee Standards Guide, let's see if I can get there fast for you. So when it's time to look, you don't have to scan through the whole 200-page document. We're starting with life science in 7th grade on page 146. So that's where you'd want to check to look for the most aligned standard after we watched. We're going to watch 5 minutes, and then I will give you some time to rate independently before we head to breakout rooms again. So go ahead and get your note-taking situation organized, and I am going to get us to the right minute in the video that we're going to watch. Okay, so I will tell you that what's happened so far, we're going to start at like minute 14. What's happened so far is that the teacher has been reviewing parts of a plant with students, and we're kind of getting to the end of this part of the lesson, which is on parts of the plant. She's going to finish up that part of the lesson and then move into the more instructional strategies.
Female ovary, and make sure you write it's the female reproductive organ. It's the female reproductive organ. Do you have that, Larry? What? What's what? Okay, I need you to make sure you have it on your chart. Got it? I got it. All right. Ovary, yeah, ovary is the female reproductive organ. Got it? Yes. And then underneath the ovary, inside you will have your ovals. Say oval. Oval. Oval is also female. All right, sounds kind of like ovary, doesn't it? All right, this is where your reproductive cell, which will become the seed when fertilized by the pollen. So when it fuses and fertilizes, it will become seeds. And you know, inside of flowers, it has seeds, right? Just like inside of oranges, it has seeds. Your apples, it has seeds, right? All of those seeds are the reproductive parts of that fruit or that plant or that animal, okay? Just like your watermelon. You have watermelon seeds. And they take those watermelon, grapefruit, all of those are some examples. But you didn't know that those are the female reproductive parts inside of that fruit. Did you know that? And I told you when we were talking about asexual and sexual reproduction, we were talking about the strawberries that have their seeds on the outside. You're eating the female part seeds of that strawberry. But that strawberry that's on the corner, let's do a quick review. Is that asexual or sexual reproduction? Asexual. Because there's only one cell being about you got it, girl. Go ahead, go with your bad self. But we're not done. We're not finished. This whole system, excuse me, slant. All right, this whole system is called the pistil. P-I-S-T-I-L, pistil. So that means from the stigma, style, ovary, and oval. This whole female reproductive system of the flower is called the pistil. So pistil needs to go under female. Got it? Got it? See, look right here. You see where it says pistil? That's this whole system, female system. You got it? Come on. Everybody with me so far? All right. So what I'm going to do as a review, I'm going to see if you can tell me if it's male or female. So when I say it, you say male. If I say it, you say female. If I say it, you say neither, if it's neither male or female. Everybody understand what we're about to do? All right. So I'm going to give you you don't want to use your nose? No. Okay. Patrick said no nose. No nose. Patrick said no nose. That's a good way to check comprehension. No nose. It's cheating. It is. But what's even more cheating is if I were to leave it on that side of the slide. Yeah. But I'm not. I know y'all thought I was going to do it. Are you ready? Yes. You remember our little chant we do. So as I review, if I say whatever, you say. So if I say pistol, you'll say female. Pistol. Female. Pistol. Female. You got it? Yes. Ready? I need to use your nose. Use your nose. We'll be here. I can cheat. I'm the teacher. Quit cheating. Ready? Close it. I got her nose. Ready? Yeah. Ready? Yeah. Go. Here we go. If I say anther, you say male. Anther. Male. Anther. Male. If I say seatpole, you say neither. Seatpole. Neither. Y'all know y'all love this video, and that is so.
Okay, we're gonna pause there on this classroom video. Go ahead and take the next 2 minutes to make some notes on how you would rate this observation on content, instructional practices, and student ownership. And then after that, we're gonna head to breakout groups. Why don't you take 2 minutes to jot down some initial ideas to get you started, and then you'll finish your conversation with your group. So let's take until 2:17. Okay, so we're gonna head to breakout rooms. You can talk about your ratings and your rationale quickly. It's gonna be about 4 minutes total, and I wanna highlight for you that if you see on the slide, the second question in the blue box says, imagine you're coaching this teacher, identify one glow and one grow. And that's really where we're gonna focus our discussion when we come back. So make sure that you get to thinking about, if this was a teacher that you were coaching, what is some feedback that you would share with them based on what you saw when you reviewed the classroom in light of the instructional walkthrough tool. So Stephen, I think we are ready to head to breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm gonna talk through these ratings really quickly here so we can spend our time talking about the glows and the grows, because more valuable for thinking about your own practice in developing science teachers. This video that we watched would have received a not yet on content. I don't know if anybody caught this, if anyone's been around long enough to catch this. This teacher is teaching an old iteration of the Tennessee standards, which actually did include a standard around reproduction and plant parts. So, you know, my hypothesis is that in watching this lesson, if you're thinking about watching it now in 2021, that this teacher is perhaps using an old textbook or an old scope and sequence, which is why that she is using, why she's teaching this lesson on plant parts, which is not a current part of the iteration of the current 7th grade standards. We also didn't see evidence of a phenomenon, another reason why this earns a not yet. Also a not yet on the instructional practices. I think that there was probably a picture of the plant diagram on the slide, which we couldn't see because just the coloring. Though I wouldn't say that she's making explicit the concepts explicit through using the plant parts, more appears to be labeling the plant parts and taking notes on the different plant parts. There was an attempt to do a check for understanding, I think, through that chant. We saw at one point students sort of stumbled on one, but I didn't see her adapt the lesson based on kids stumbling through identifying that plant part. So I wouldn't say that that would help to move her further along on the instructional practices scale either. And then we really didn't hear students speaking at all in this 5 minutes that we watched. So they participated in the chant, but they didn't express any of their ideas or do any discussion around the content of the lesson. So for that reason, this earns a not yet on those 3 indicators. Okay, so let's do some glows and grows, and I'm going to call on some groups to hear. I think let's start with, I'd love to hear a glow from a nanotechnology, because I think they're like the last group to come back, which makes me think that they had maybe a pretty good conversation. So nanotechnology was Amy B. Helton, not sure which first name, Scott and Sherry. What is one of the glows that you all talked about in watching this video?
I'll speak for the group. Our glow was that she was getting students involved and engaged through choral responses, her enthusiasm. That would definitely be a glow.
Yeah, I agree. Sherry, do you have something you want to add if I say come off mute?
I just didn't know if Dr. Horton was going to speak or if I was. I agree. That was the glow. You know, very motivating. But you know, as far as the grow, the develop and the construct parts of the standard just weren't there. It was all at a recall level.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for sharing. I think I have similar things in my own glows here. I think we saw evidence of a strong classroom culture, which even though we didn't rate on that, we could see the students were following directions, completing the tasks that was being asked of them. And then the use of the chant demonstrates to me that the teacher cares about engagement of her students and thinking about how to create joy through music and repetition, which is definitely a strength of her. If tweaked a little bit, like it also could have been an opportunity to check for students' understanding. And so I think that lets me know that this teacher really thinking about how to keep our kids engaged and continuously engaged in something that they enjoy over the course of the lesson. Let's move to grows. Let's do geology, which was Cody, Emily, Katrina, Mira, and Will. What did you guys talk about for grows for this teacher?
We talked about that. We all felt that she needed some help with rigor, improving the rigor of her lesson. Most of the responses the students were giving were just reproduction. They didn't have to do a lot of thinking, and we'd like to see her go deeper into that.
Yeah, and so you're thinking about like the rigor, both in terms, when you say rigor, I think about both like the correct content and the integration of the 3 parts of the standard, which helps to support the lesson being more meaty if you're thinking about using the engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts. And then also this idea of student ownership. I heard you talk about like having kids do more of the thinking and the lifting, when we really saw that they were focused on just one part of the content, and if it was correct, the disciplinary core ideas on the memorization of knowledge. So I had 2 grows that are related to that. I sort of phrased them as how I might present them to the teacher. And so the first thing that I said was that I would review the Tennessee science standards and adjust the scope and sequence to focus on grade appropriate content as dictated by the 2018 standards. As we said, this plant parts is really an old iteration of the standards, which perhaps this teacher hasn't updated their current content. And then anchor the content of the lesson in a phenomenon or design challenge to make it more meaningful and stickier for kids. So we didn't see that in the video that we watched. And I think that you'll see like this is a common grow that I'm putting in a lot of the feedback for today. And that's because I do think it is such a foundational part of what makes strong science instruction is putting it in context so it has meaning for kids. And so I think when that's not present, that's usually one of the first pieces of feedback that I'll give a teacher is thinking about how to connect something to a phenomenon before I begin to think about the instructional practices piece or the student ownership piece. It's going to be, we're going to get to those levels of rigor and engagement if we make the content meaningful by connecting it to a phenomenon rather than thinking about maybe quick hit strategies for and talks or other like technique-y engagement things. We want to get that phenomenon in place first. Okay. And so I referenced this quickly before we went for break, but again, wanted to point you back to this science teaching resource bank. I'm thinking about working with this teacher. My guess, based on the short video that we watched, is that this is a teacher who cares a lot about her students' engagement and has some good content knowledge because she made some good connections between the plant parts and sexual and asexual reproduction that they talked about previously, but maybe needs a refresh on the current structure of, or an introduction to the current structure of the standards, and a resetting of her vision for what strong science instruction looks like. So this, I think it's one of the last links in the document that says rigorous science instruction. It links to this organization called Ambitious Science Teaching. And that is the video that we watched today, the chemistry video. They have a whole series of all different grade levels of videos. And I might watch this with my teacher side by side, or ask my teacher to watch this and then debrief it with me to help to realign her understanding of what strong science instruction looks like in the current framework of standards. Because I feel like from this one, you can see that she really cares about her kids and doing well, but maybe doesn't have some of that foundational background knowledge, and using a resource like this might be a good place to start to help her build that. Again, those are there for you to continue to build your own knowledge or to use in partnership with your teachers. All right, I want to pause here to go back to the STEM Teaching Action Planner. We did not have time to revisit that after we talked about grade appropriate assignments, but I would really love for you to have a few minutes to think about, now that we've talked about grade appropriate assignments and talked about rigorous instruction as it connects to meaningful science experiences, for you to jot down some ideas around what is the current state of these things in your building and where do you want to move? What are your next steps that you want to take? So I've highlighted in the yellow box those top 2 rows. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes for independent reflection to jot down some ideas. And then we'll talk about what are some next steps that you could take given where you are in this process with school. So access that document. I think Katrina, Chris, I can put in the chat if we need it again. And then we'll come back and talk about it at about 2:30. So I think folks will have a variety of next steps here, given the context of your role and your school. You know, some folks are middle school, some are high school, some folks a small school and a large school, and the scale at which you're thinking about next steps can be widely different. But I do think there's some value to hearing about what some other folks are thinking about. So we just hear 2 next steps that folks are thinking about as it relates to either grade appropriate assignment or strong instruction. And so if you have an idea that you're willing to share with the group, if you just put your name in the chat, once we've got 2 names, we'll hear those 2 ideas. Okay, Scott, why don't you go ahead and kick us off, and then we'll look for one more volunteer to put their name in the chat to share out next step we're thinking about.
All right, so for us, one of the big issues is at the high school and middle school level, we have dedicated science teachers, right? Whereas at elementary school level, we really don't. So it kind of hurts our ability to build the kind of rigor that's necessary. So the students go into middle school and they're not really prepared. So one of the things that we started to do in some ways before the pandemic started was really do some PD where the high school science teachers worked with the elementary school teachers and actually helped them create experiments in a bag and that sort of thing to really give them access to the type of rigor and instruction that would be beneficial. And they help them sort of create lessons so they can see, here's our exemplar lessons and here's how they go. So there isn't so much of a disparity between those two levels, because once you get to the middle school, you're kind of, it's demotivating for students if they don't really care about it until that point. And it's really good instruction once you get there. So hopefully we can continue that in the future. It's really kind of the strategy is to dig that back up and try to get people excited about it again, I think.
Awesome, thanks for sharing, Scott. Beth, what are you thinking about?
Kind of tagging on what he was saying. We started a couple of years ago doing monthly PLCs. Like it was actually, we put it in writing that we wanted it to be the first Wednesday of every month, just to kind of have that on everyone's agenda. And with COVID, of course, that was steered off course, but just having that opportunity. We do weekly PLCs with grade level teams because they share planning periods, but it's more important to have that subject PLC of the fifth grade teachers, the fifth grade science teacher being able to talk to the sixth grade science teacher and the seventh grade science teacher, so that we're all on the same page, as he was saying, to incorporate those different lessons. A challenge that we'll have this year at our school, we're moving a teacher who was a sixth grade ELA teacher for years into a fifth grade science position. So just, I've just had her on my mind throughout the course of this training of, giving her those resources. She's never taught science before. She's eager and excited to incorporate those things. However, when you've never done those things, going from ELA sixth grade, that is a completely different, curriculum and all the strategies that she'll have to kind of be pulling from. So next step for me would be those non-evaluatory, support going into her classroom and really trying to help her. And then those PLCs, like I was discussing with the different science teachers, to give her as much support as possible.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate the way that both of you connected. I think so a lot of things we've talked about right today of like the importance of shared vision, right? And shared vision across grade levels, across grade bands is really important to make sure that kids are on a path to STEM college and career, that it's not just like a shared vision within your own school, but like in the whole K-12 path. And how can you create collaboration to internalize that shared vision? And then, and like we said, like the schools that had some of the strongest results in the opportunity myth were schools that had those sacred times and structures created to support teachers in developing towards that vision. So putting the PLC on the calendar every month so that folks can come together and work towards that shared vision is really important. Or having, like you said, Beth, that non-evaluative coaching and support to help them develop in the ways that they need to. I mean, this building content knowledge is so difficult for a first year, not even first year teacher, but the first year teaching a new subject, right? And it takes time. You can't get over that hill in the fall. You continue to do that all year. So like thinking about long-term support for new teachers and building content knowledge is really important. And how do you use the resources that you have in your building, people, time, structures, like curriculum, to be able to support those teachers is a really important next step to be thinking about. So I appreciate you sharing those ideas. Thank you. We're going to move, we're going to bring it all together now by doing one last round of practice where we take a look at a single teacher and a single set of assignments and lessons that go together. And we're doing that as we think about what do we want to put in place in the fall to be able to support our teachers using these two tools. As I mentioned before, this is just a recommendation for how a flow that a teacher leader or a coach or you could use in your building to support your teachers using these two tools. And so there's 5 steps in order here, which is like an ideal way to go through this. And you may have to kind of pick and choose the steps, right? But like we talked about before, when possible, you want to begin by using the assignment tool to review the assignments before teaching. So depending on the size of your science departments or your school, you may be able to pick those all up one day a week and take a look at those before you observe the lesson the next week. Or you may just want to review them the day before. But ideally, we're looking at the assignment before observing the lesson and giving the teacher feedback on that if possible, so they have time to adjust their materials before they execute the lesson. As we mentioned before, also, I think it's really helpful to jot down some notes or questions that you want to be thinking about or observing for when you go into lesson based on what you've seen in the tool. I think this came up when we were actually looking at the text of the cardiovascular system as is potentially one piece of the lesson, but not the entire a full demonstration of everything that's going to happen in that lesson. So if I was reviewing that assignment before I observed that lesson, I would really want to think about, like, I really want to make note of how they're using this text, because how they're using this text potentially could lead to some really high leverage feedback for how they incorporate the science and engineering practices or how they think about using the curriculum that they have in front of them. Then I am going to observe the lesson using the walkthrough tool. And then finally, I'm going to debrief the classroom observation with the teacher in person by sharing strengths, gaps, and next steps. And as we just talked about, we saw in the opportunity myth that the strongest schools in the study observed classroom instruction against this shared vision using shared tools and provided feedback frequently in a non-evaluative format to help teachers improve their instruction rapidly over time. And so for that reason, we recommend that you consider what a process like this might sound like to be able to provide teachers with ongoing support over the course of an entire year. So we're going to practice that. Okay, so our last practice today is a high school biology classroom. And as I just suggested, you're going to have the opportunity to look at the assignment first. This assignment is in your case study folder in the Google Drive. You're going to use what you've learned today in the practice with the whole tool to take 5 minutes to read the assignment and then to rate the assignment with the grade appropriate assignments tool on your own. You may not have perfect ratings by the end of these 5 minutes, but you want to just to get a sense of the general alignment of the content practices and relevance indicators of the student assignment tool. And then we're not going to talk about our ratings. We're going to imagine this is a case study with a teacher. We're going to look at the assignment, rate it, get some ideas, and then we're going to head directly into the classroom observation. So go ahead right now and make sure that you have accessed this high school biology assignment from your folder. And then you'll take 5 minutes of independent time to read it. Krista, are you able to, did I put the link in there for you? Okay, so links coming in the chat if you haven't been able to find it. So you've got until let's do 2:46. We're gonna do 5 or 3 minutes, 2:46 to take a look at that assessment, and then we'll move into the classroom. 2:46. Okay, we are going to get ready to head into the classroom right now. I'll tell you that we are entering the classroom. The teacher has done this funny activity with her students. They've completed the activity. They have not discussed or debriefed the activity. They've gone through this that you can see on the screen. They've done the activity. They've analyzed the results. And then we're going to watch about 3 minutes of her lesson right after that activity.
You can shrink these if you want. So depletion, you could say something decreases. And then expansion, you can say becoming larger. You can always shorten things if you need to.
Oops, sorry, y'all.
Just not so short that you're writing the word like the. That doesn't help you, okay? So, depletion when something goes down, expansion when something becomes larger. So we just defined a limiting factor. A limiting factor is something that keeps a population in check. It keeps it from growing too large. Okay? And limiting factors include, they could be an abiotic or a biotic factor. So let's do something real quick. At your tables, discuss these 3 questions. What's abiotic? What's biotic? And what is created when one of these factors is limited? Go ahead and talk. Are you answering the 3rd question? Okay, so give me an example, please, of an abiotic factor. Water. What would happen if water was limited? What would that create? Good. And they're dying because they're doing what? Very good. They have to compete for it, and whoever loses, right? Nice. Everybody nods. We all feel good. What's created when something's limited?
Scarce.
That's what we say. So we say it's scarce when we don't have a lot of that. Now, what does scarcity create within a population?
Competition.
There you go, right? 1 piece of pizza, 4 of us, we're going to fight it out, right? Okay. Quickly. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Kevin, what is an abiotic factor? Non-living factor. Good. Nancy, give me an example, please. The sun. Very good. What's a biotic factor? Myers. A living thing. Very good. Can I have an example, Maria, of a biotic factor? A living thing. Plants, yeah, exactly. Very good. Now, what is created? Melanie? If one of these factors is limited, if it's a limiting factor, what's created in that scenario? Scarce is what we say it is, right? So if I don't have a lot of it, I'm saying that, hey, this is really scarce right now. My question is what happens in a population when something is scarce? What happens in a population if something's scarce? Okay, huh? Okay, so I have another way to put it. Thank you for your hands. I have another way to put it. Melanie, just staying with her for a moment. Okay, apocalypse. We are all that is.
Okay, we'll pause there on our teacher's observation. I'm going to send you directly into breakout rooms to talk about what you've noticed from both the assignment and the classroom observation. So what strengths would you identify in the assignment and the observation? What would you name as high leverage areas for growth? And what next steps might you take with the teacher, with this teacher if you're coaching them? So you're going to go for 3 minutes, and then when you come back, we'll talk about our areas for growth and our identified next steps.
And if you're reviewing this video not live, then go ahead and do the breakout activity now.
Great, welcome back. A few minutes to chat about your reflections from this teacher and how you might coach them based on your vision for excellent instruction. I'm going to name some of the key takeaways and next steps that I would focus on based on these two artifacts. Overall, the content aligns with that of the biology standards. So in comparison to the previous teacher, we really thought about alignment of the scope and sequence. This would not be an area of priority for me. It also appears that this teacher does understand the importance of putting the content in context. The fact that she had the rabbit activity to begin with and she started with that gives me a good sense that like she understands that putting it in a phenomenon is important to then head into some content knowledge building. Kids had some opportunities to work with the science and engineering practices in the task itself. And then when we got to, which I think was a little surprising to look at that assessment and then see what we saw in the lesson video, because once they got past that activity, the lesson became heavily focused on direct instruction and teacher-led lecture. So we did not see a connection between that phenomenon that was presented in the beginning and then what we saw in the video, which I think that was interesting and surprising. I was working with this teacher, a couple of ideas that I would have about how I would move forward. I would really go back to the first started that ambitious science teaching video series that I mentioned before to show the teacher what it could look like to connect, to make a connection between activities. If she's anchoring in this phenomenon of the population of rabbits decreasing because of the limited space. To talk about like how she could have connected that activity all the way through the content. So she asked kids about what are some abiotic and biotic factors. And it wouldn't have taken too much of a heavy lift to shift those questions to reflect actually the content that they had done already in the activity with the rabbits and to make that content more meaningful for students rather than kind of two very separate activities. So I would have her watch those videos as an example to set her vision. I would co-plan with her to help her understand how to let students explore the phenomenon through the content, and then maybe script some additional questions so that the thinking relies more on students. We saw kids talking a little bit about those three questions and her sharing out some of the ideas, but all of the responses that we heard were closed questions with correct or incorrect answers, not really sharing their developing thinking and not sharing answers more than 1 or 2 words. So that is another thing that I would think about is after we've worked on this idea of the phenomenon is then thinking about how can we script some additional opportunities for student ownership that are more open-ended. Okay, and so we're gonna wrap up. I'm gonna not pause for this STEM action planner now, but I wanna highlight it for you to come back to and then to also maybe revisit once you're here on Thursday in thinking about opportunities for teacher development. So you've practiced doing some hypothetical teacher development yourself, but in thinking about your real context with the real teachers in your school, I think it's important to think about like, are you going to be the person who does this work with teachers? Are there other people who aren't here today that you want to empower to be able to do some of this coaching and support of teachers? And what are the resources and constraints for doing that effectively with your teachers starting in the fall? So that's why that third question there says, do teachers at my school have access to the development opportunities they need to grow as science teachers? And if you take a few minutes to think about that, you can reflect on what are the opportunities and what are the challenges and how can you potentially overcome them or mitigate them so that you're able to do some of this teacher development work with science teachers, which I know as a science teacher was very hard to get because there's so much pressure put for math and ELA. So thinking about how you can use the resources you have to support those teachers as well. All right, so I'm going to wrap us up here and take us back to where we started, which just is that we know that our students have big goals and they are often related to STEM. And I have so much gratitude for your engagement and your participation today. And I know that if we're going to put our students on a path to achieve these big goals for STEM careers, we've got to be really thinking about how we develop our vision and our teachers' vision for strong instruction and then equip them with what they need so they're able to achieve these goals. So thanks for coming and thanks for thinking about your kids' big career goals in STEM today for these 3 hours. When we come back together on Thursday, same time, different date, we're going to shift our focus from science and build off of this and think about math instruction and how can we ensure that kids have meaningful experiences in math classrooms. I also want to take this opportunity to plug the educator working group. which is an opportunity for teachers at your school to come together to share ideas, discuss best practices and challenges as it relates to STEM instruction. So if you think that this is something that would be a great opportunity for your teachers, I put my colleague Katrina's email address on here. You can reach out to her for more information. And then I think this survey that you'll take on Thursday also allows you to indicate your interest in the educator working group as a way for your teachers to connect with other educators outside of their building. So definitely think about if that's a good fit for your folks. We're definitely looking for folks to join this educator working group in the fall. And then I'll just take us to our final attendance survey. So we need to do it one more time to quickly before you sign up, complete this quick attendance survey. So that you have credit for coming here today. My email address is there again on the screen. I'm happy to help with any follow-up questions that you have about science and instruction at your schools. I will hang out here to answer any questions that you have, but once you have opened up that link and completed the survey, you are welcome to log off the Zoom call, and we will look forward to seeing you again on Thursday.